You know what started me getting this video started? I was watching something on House of the Dragon, and it turns out that not only were the Targaryens during that time based on the British anarchy that was going on, with women rulers and, coming back and everything, especially what happens later. But it turns out that a lot of it, especially the internal politicking and everything that happened before, was actually during the Byzantine Empire, which I don't know a lot about. And I was like saying to myself, what don't I know? What history don't I know a lot about? And I was like, the Great Northern War. So, hey everyone, that sexy nerd is back again. And as we see, we're doing something slightly different today. Someone we've never covered before, but they got a lot of views, so people seem to like them, and hopefully you guys feel the same way. So let's learn about the Great Northern War. We're going to be doing like all these videos and everything, and we're going to get on different subjects. So I'll do this as a little side project. Also, maybe do some more oversimplified videos. I do have to do Napoleon next, so hopefully that'll be out to you soon. And also I'll have another video coming out for you very soon. But let's not talk about it anymore. Let's just get into the episode. And remember, please smash that like button if you want to see more sexy and nerdy content, and subscribe if you believe I deserve it. I'm trying to get to 1,000 subscribers and beyond, and I could use y'all help. With that all the way, let's get into it, y'all.
1697. Sweden is one of the truly great powers of Europe, with an unstoppable army and an empire that nearly encircles the Baltic. But as the church bells toll, the world knows the king is dead and his 14-year-old son is inheritor to the crown. The vultures begin to circle.
Which always happens. You wouldn't believe how many times this happens in Game of Thrones. I mean, actually, God, it happened during Joffrey and Tommen's reign. Look what Tywin was doing.
The danger of empire is that the more you have that other people want, and the Swedish Empire was no exception. In this case, the lands of the Swedish Empire had drawn the attention of someone brilliant, dynamic, ruthless, and ambitious. The 25-year-old Peter the Great. Peter had a love of the West. He was drawn to all
I have learned a little bit about this, but I want to see it from the Swedish perspective.
Things European. He saw the future of Russia not to the south or the east, but chasing the setting sun. He saw that future in becoming part of the great European economic system. But there was one obstacle to this grand design. He needed a port in the Baltic. He needed a way his ships could sail west bearing Russian goods or projecting the might of Russian arms. But the Baltic ports that Russia had once held had all been gobbled up by the Swedish Empire. Now it was time to take them back. But Peter wasn't alone. The king of the Danes had long chafed under the idea that traditionally Danish land in southern Sweden had been taken from them by the Swedish Empire, and he longed to get it back. And Augustus, the king of Poland-Lithuania, found an intriguing prospect within the Swedish borders as well. You see, the Polish-Lithuanian king was an elected title without much power, but he wanted to become a hereditary monarch, ruling over...
Don't they always? Isn't that always the story?
for Poland-Lithuania.
I mean, seriously. Wasn't that a period... Didn't that happen in France? I'm sure the royal family in England now want everything to go back to the way it was back in the medieval times. I'm sure they do. Like, they want to do away with constitutional monarchies and such. The French did it, so,
as many of the other monarchs of Europe ruled over their domain. Right on his border, just inside the Swedish territory, was the small province of Livonia. The nobles there offered to declare him their hereditary king if he would liberate them from the Swedish. This intrigued him. If he could get them to declare him king and then integrate them with Poland-Lithuania, it would go a long way toward achieving his larger goal of making a real kingship out of the Polish-Lithuanian crown. Soon, these three forces became secret allies against the Swedish. Things dragged on for a while as Peter continued to pretend to be a friend of Sweden, hoping to avoid a war with them until his current war with the Ottomans could be wrapped up. But at last, in 1700, his allies moved ahead, striking at the Swedes without warning, though in a piecemeal and ill-coordinated fashion. 14,000 Polish-Lithuanian troops marched across the border of Livonia first, and laid siege to the capital. But the Swedes counterattacked. The Polish-Lithuanian troops were shattered. Their general lay dead. Soon, they were in full retreat back to the border. Then the Danes made their move, a move to which Charles XII, the boy king of Sweden, responded with unexpected vigor. With the energy of youth, Charles raised money from every quarter, bolstering the finances of the overextended Swedish Empire and launching a force that he himself would lead. After daring naval maneuvers and a surprise landing, the stunned Danish forces capitulated and left the alliance against the Swedes entirely. Meanwhile, Peter still stood by. It was the perfect time to press the Swedes, and he knew it, but still no word of peace had come from the Ottomans. At last, when the peace was signed with the Ottomans in the hottest days of summer, it was finally Peter's turn to act. He did. To support the now reeling Polish-Lithuanian forces, he raised a massive army and marched toward Livonia. His objective was Narva, a major town right on the Russian border. But in this age, with the mud and roads of Russia, an army of that size moved pretty slowly. It was November before they reached Narva.
That was, it's really funny that they actually counted on that in World War One, when mobilization was a little bit more, they thought it was going to slow the Russians down, but they came in coming. Like, the Russians went through many problems during World War One, and in fact, they were beaten the hell up by Germany, but, they did surprise the enemy in a couple of ways.
In the biting cold, they dug trenches into the frozen ground and prepared for a siege. But their guns did little, and their assaults were swept aside. So a real siege it became, to starve the town out. But once Charles XII had thrashed the Danes, he had wasted no time packing up his little army and moving it east to deal with the invasion of Livonia. Braving autumn storms on the Baltic, he personally led his forces toward the true test of their strength. Many of his counselors argued against this endeavor. After all, even if he got to Livonia, he'd have to march his troops 150 miles across wasted ground in the middle of winter. And if he actually reached Narva, he would be outnumbered at least 4-1. More than that, the Russians he planned to assault were dug in with siege works, defenses they'd been preparing for weeks. But the now 18-year-old Charles was not put off. He was spoiling for a fight. So with the same boundless energy he applied to everything, he launched his winter campaign. And thus it was that on the 30th of November, the young king assembled his 10,000 men against at least 40,000 Russians. They calmly began to prepare for an assault. The Russians watched this in disbelief. Peter, who was used to a much slower pace of warfare, thought that it was impossible that anyone could attack immediately after completing a march like Charles just had. So he had left the night before to attend business in Russia, leaving in command a subordinate who, in line with Peter's policy of bringing in foreign experts, was a foreigner who barely spoke Russian. The rain began to pour.
What?
And yet the Swedish army calmly continued to ready for...
God, man, I thought the Punics were actually stupid during the Punic... Actually, no. Russia makes a lot of stupid decisions, especially throughout history.
For an assault. The sky darkened. A storm rolled in. The snow was pouring in sheets, sleet slashing at the troops. The blizzard blinded both sides. Fighting was impossible. Men stood shivering in regimental formation, weapons at the ready for a battle that wasn't gonna come. Charles's advisors suggested that he call off the assault. But then, the roaring wind began to turn, and Charles's keen eyes saw it. During this brief window, the enemy would be entirely blinded by the snow. He ordered the advance. 2 columns hidden by a sea of white fell upon the Russian lines, which quickly began to break, shots flying high in the snow. Soon it was down to bayonet and saber in the Russian trenches. Most of the Russian troops were ill-trained levies and began to scatter before the Swedish veterans. The Swedes had pierced the enemy line, and the Russian troops began to melt away. Soon it was a complete rout. Panicked Russian soldiers chased by ragged and wraith-like Swedes, appearing...
And that's funny, they got beaten in the snow, man.
...like ghosts from out of the snow. The men stampeded over one of the only bridges across the Narva River. Under the weight of so many panicked souls, it collapsed. Timber and stone and Russian bodies tumbling into the water below. Thousands of Russians were trapped. It was an impossible victory, a crushing blow. But now Charles had another objective. The King of Poland-Lithuania had yet to personally suffer at his hand, and Charles was not a man to let what he considered to be a perfidious treachery go unpunished. So, though Peter greatly feared a Swedish advance into Russia, and began immediately patching together a second force for defense of the motherland, Charles did not pursue Peter's deeply wounded army. Instead, he wintered in Livonia and prepared to bring the fight to the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth the following year. Meanwhile, the rest of Europe had time.
See, that's what happens, people. You don't give your enemy time to regroup. When you see them suffering, most likely you go in for the kill.
Tumbled into the chaos of the War of the Spanish Succession. So preoccupied they were with the events in the West that they were no longer engaged enough in the events of the East to serve as arbiters or brokers for peace. In fact, diplomats and ministers wrote to Charles to tell him that he had a singular opportunity. He could tip the scales of Europe. If he would make a victorious peace with the powers he had just crushed, he could determine the outcome of the Spanish War, and decide who would inherit the vast lands of the Spanish crown. Play it right, and he could ensure another 100 years of preeminence for the Swedish people. But he never responded to any of these letters. He had his sights set on only one thing: war. So join us next time as we explore the character of the two great antagonists of this conflict, Peter and Charles, and cover the invasion of Poland-Lithuania.
So that was really interesting. I just discovered extra history, actually, just not too long after I discovered Oversimplified, which again, I'm just letting sit there, and I gotta really just record some of the videos that I've done. Like I said, I probably should do both the French Revolution and then Napoleon. Because they're both the same. But anyway, I remember hearing about Peter the Great, and imagine how Russia would have been if people had, followed his example. But, I heard everything kind of went crazy afterwards, and, there was a lot of things going on with it. Did he kill his son? And, it's really funny. Why is Peter known as the Great, who he killed when he killed his son, but Ivan the Terrible did the same thing for the same reason, but is is known as is the Terrible. So I think I heard somewhere, I think it was History Matters, that said that Ivan the Terrible was actually hated also by the nobility, and that's why he got the name Terrible. So sometimes the rich really do write history. But anyway, I'm really excited to hear more. I want to hear more about what happens during this fight, and I hope you are too. So please smash that like button if you want to see more sexy and nerdy content, and subscribe if you think I deserve it. And I'll see you all in the next video.